For 12 years, I treated my sister's best friend like a gas leak I learned to ignore. The kind of danger you stop smelling after a while because calling it out would mean starting a fire. Then one night after a party where someone spiked the sangria, I ended up driving her home. She unbuckled her seatbelt, slid across the bench seat, and whispered something that changed everything. "I don't want to go home. My name is Adam." For 12 years, Kate was the one woman I couldn't let myself want. She saw me through a divorce. I built her daughter's first bike, but we never dared cross the invisible line my sister drew between us. Now she'd erased that line with 4 whispered words. I had no idea that turning left instead of right would force me to choose between the woman I loved and the family I couldn't lose. To understand what happened next, you have to understand who Kate was. She wasn't some stranger my sister Sarah brought around a few times. Kate was a permanent fixture at every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every hospital waiting room. My sister met her during freshman orientation in college, and by graduation they had already designated each other maid of honor at weddings neither of them had planned. That was 20 years ago. For the last 12 of those years, I had watched Kate from the safest distance I could manage. She showed up at my door when my divorce papers arrived, carrying Thai food and a bottle of cheap wine she pretended to like. I assembled her daughter Chloe's first tricycle on Christmas Eve, while Kate and my sister wrapped presents in the next room and shouted instructions I couldn't hear over the sound of my own heartbreak. We never discussed it. That was the unspoken treaty. Sarah treated Kate like the sister she actually chose, and I was the older brother who was supposed to protect the family perimeter, not breach it. Some lines existed for a reason, and I had spent more than a decade convincing myself that crossing this one would cost me everything. The problem was, Kate and I had been holding our breath for so long that neither of us noticed we were already drowning. The night of Sarah's birthday party, everything finally cracked. Someone, probably Sarah's husband Mike, had spiked the sangria with a rum that had no business being in a fruit drink. By 10 o'clock, most of the guests were either laughing too loudly or confessing secrets they would regret in the morning. Kate held it together better than most, but I saw her quiet all evening, nursing the same glass for an hour, a tension behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the party. When Sarah handed me her keys and asked me to drive Kate home, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, because I wanted to too much. "You would be doing me a massive favor," Sarah said, touching my arm with the absent affection of a sibling who didn't suspect a thing. Kate had her own car, of course, but by that point no one trusted the sangria, and I was the oldest and most boring person in the building. I accepted because refusing would have looked stranger than agreeing. The first half-mile was nothing, just small talk about the party and whether Mike would ever learn to measure a drink. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt. I heard the click and felt the truck dip as she slid across the bench toward me. The space between us shrank from friendly to electric, and before I could process what was happening, her knee touched mine. "I don't want to go home." She whispered it like a confession. She was not talking about an empty house. She was naming the thing we had never said aloud, that after 12 years of sidestepping the obvious, the one door we both kept locked had swung open. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. My sister's trust filled the cab, but Kate was not flirting. She was holding her breath like a woman who had finally stopped running from a fire she had been fueling her entire adult life. So I signaled left and took the long loop around the lake, a road that added 30 minutes to a drive that should have taken 10. I didn't know what I would say when we reached the end, but when she exhaled and let her hand drift closer to mine, I knew we were not going to her house. Parked at the overlook, the lake flat and silver under a half-moon, we finally talked. Not the careful, coded conversations we had mastered over the years, the ones with invisible walls around every sentence. This was unfiltered. She told me she had been in love with me since the night of my divorce, when I sat on her couch and told her I felt like a failure, and she wanted to say something then, but didn't because of my sister. I admitted I had assembled her daughter's bike not out of obligation, but because being near her was the only thing that made me feel useful after my marriage collapsed. We didn't kiss that night, not yet. We just sat in the cab and excavated a truth that had been buried under 12 years of silence. When I finally dropped her at her front door at 2 in the morning, we both knew the line was gone. I drove home in a daze and didn't sleep. At 7 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. She said, "Hey, I need to ask you something weird. Kate called me this morning and sounded different. Did something happen last night that I should know about?" I sat up so fast my head spun. Different how? I managed, stalling. "I don't know," Sarah said. She just sounded happy, suspiciously happy. Kate never sounds happy before 10 in the morning unless something happened. The accusation hung in the air, unvoiced but fully formed. My sister wasn't asking whether I'd driven Kate home. She was asking whether I'd stayed there. I told her the drink was spiked and Kate was tired, then ended the call before my voice could betray me. I spent the next hour staring at the ceiling and realizing I had just lied to my sister for the first time in our adult lives. That should have felt like a warning. It felt like a door I couldn't close. Kate texted me at 8. "Sarah called you, didn't she?" I replied. She asked if something happened. Her next message took 5 minutes to arrive. "What did you say?" I told her the truth. I dodged barely. Her reply was 3 words. "We need to talk." We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town where nobody knew us, sitting in a corner booth with our drinks untouched. Kate looked the way I felt, sleepless and suspended between exhilaration and terror. She told me that Chloe had stayed overnight at a friend's, so her daughter hadn't witnessed her coming home at 2 in the morning, but that was a small mercy. The larger problem was Sarah. My sister had a sixth sense for secrets and a record of never forgiving the people who kept them from her. "If she finds out from someone else," Kate said, "she'll see it as a conspiracy. She'll feel ambushed." I knew she was right. Sarah didn't handle being the last to know about anything. When our parents divorced, she was the last sibling to find out our father had moved out 3 weeks prior. She didn't speak to my mother for 6 months. That was the scale of retribution we were dealing with. For the next week, we tried to act normal. We attended a family barbecue at Sarah's house, standing on opposite sides of the yard like we had done for 12 years. Only now every accidental glance felt like arson. Mike asked me to flip burgers, and I burned half of them because I was watching Kate help Sarah slice watermelon and wondering if my sister could see the new crack in the universe. She couldn't, not yet. But she noticed Kate was different, as promised. She pulled me aside later and said, "Kate seems lighter lately." Did something change with her ex? I shook my head and pretended ignorance. The lie was getting easier. That terrified me more than the lying itself. 5 days later, Sarah stopped by my apartment unannounced. It was a Sunday afternoon and I had just gotten off the phone with Kate. My guard was down. Sarah walked in, glanced at my coffee table and froze. There was a book there, a novel Kate had lent me 2 nights earlier, with a bookmark in the shape of a tiny paintbrush that I hadn't thought to hide. "That's Kate's," Sarah said, not asking. "Her student made her that bookmark. She's had it for years." My mind raced through a dozen lies and found none fast enough. So I did the one thing I hadn't prepared for. I told her the truth. "Something did happen after the party," I said. "We talked. For the first time, really talked. And we've been talking since." Sarah didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat down slowly on the edge of my couch and stared at the bookmark like it was evidence from a crime scene she hadn't wanted to solve. Then she said something that cracked the entire foundation of what I thought I knew. "I've been waiting 12 years for you to notice her." I blinked. "What?" "After your divorce," Sarah said, her voice flat, "I told Kate she should say something. She said she'd rather keep you as a friend than risk losing you entirely. So I backed off. And I waited. And you never looked." The anger in her voice wasn't about the secret. It was about the lost time. That was the pivot. I had spent more than a decade assuming Sarah would see any relationship with Kate as a betrayal. Instead, she saw the silence as one. She had been rooting for us the whole time, and now that we'd finally collided, the only thing that hurt her wasn't that we were together. It was that we hadn't trusted her enough to let her in. "I'm not mad you're seeing her," Sarah said, finally looking at me. "I'm mad you both made me the villain in a story where I was supposed to be the ally." Then she stood up, grabbed her purse, and left before I could form a response. I called Kate immediately. She went silent for a long time after I repeated Sarah's words. Then she whispered, "I never knew she told you to notice me." Neither of us had known. For 12 years, we'd been navigating around an obstacle that was really a doorframe. We decided to give Sarah space, but space didn't make things easier. The gossip started 2 days later. One of the guests from the party had seen us pull into the lake overlook and mentioned it to someone, who mentioned it to someone else, until the entire extended circle was buzzing with a version of events that was half truth and half speculation. Kate's ex-husband, a man named Derek who had spent 3 years being absent and 1 year suddenly invested in his daughter's life, heard the rumors through a mutual friend. He called Kate that Thursday and said, "If you're exposing my daughter to some guy you're sneaking around with, we're going to have a problem." Chloe had only met me a handful of times as Uncle Adam, the family friend who built her bike. Now Derek was threatening to file for a custody modification based on unstable home environment. The stakes had just lurched from personal to legal. Sarah heard about Derek's threat through Mike, who heard it at work because small towns don't keep secrets, they just polish them into weapons. She showed up at my door again, this time with exhaustion instead of anger. "This is getting out of control," she said. "Mom already called me asking if it's true that you and Kate are involved." I didn't know what to say. Then she looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen since our father's funeral. "If you love her, Adam, you need to decide whether you're going to hide her or claim her. Because right now you're doing neither and it's costing her a lot more than it's costing you." That was the moment the weight shifted, not onto me but onto what I was willing to do. Sarah gave me one more sentence before she walked out. "I'm hosting dinner Sunday. If you want my support, you'll both be there, and I mean really there. No more silence." The door closed, and I realized that the safe, secret thing we had built in the dark was about to be dragged into a room full of people who had known us our whole lives and would demand an explanation for why we had waited so long. And Derek would be watching for any sign that we were fractured enough to exploit. The week before Sunday dinner was the longest of my life. Derek didn't just threaten and vanish. He sent a registered letter through a family lawyer that arrived at Kate's door on Tuesday morning while Chloe was getting ready for school. Kate opened it, read the first 3 lines, and felt the floor drop. He was petitioning for a custody review on the grounds that Kate had introduced a romantic partner into the household without formal notice, exposing their daughter to an unstable relational environment. He cited the Lake Overlook sighting as evidence. Someone he knew had driven past that night and recognized my truck. A small town isn't just a place, it's a surveillance network. Chloe saw her mother's face go pale and asked what was wrong. Kate, being the woman she is, folded the letter, kissed her daughter's forehead and said, "Nothing that can't be handled." Then she called me from the parking lot of a grocery store, crying so hard she couldn't speak for the first 30 seconds. That was the real cost of our secret. Not just my sister's trust, but a custody battle Kate had spent 3 years avoiding by being so careful, so invisible, so perfectly alone in her personal life that Derek had no ammunition. Now we had handed him a loaded gun. I hired a lawyer that same afternoon, not because I thought Derek had any chance of winning, but because the sheer existence of the petition meant Kate would have to sit in a conference room with her ex-husband and argue about whether she was a fit mother. That process alone, the questions, the depositions, the slow bureaucratic violence of family court, was a punishment she didn't deserve. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Alina who had seen this playbook 100 times, said, "He's not trying to win custody. He's trying to force you to prove you're innocent, which is its own form of hell. The best countermove is stability, public stability. If you and Kate present as a committed, long-term couple with family support, his case collapses." That word, public, hit me harder than the legal language. She was asking us to do exactly what Sarah had demanded, stop hiding, and do it in a way that a judge would see as legitimate. We were being forced to formalize our love on a timeline set by a man who had weaponized our silence. But here's where it gets worse. Derek had a second move we didn't see coming. On Thursday, he called Chloe directly. Not Kate, not the lawyer. He called his 9-year-old daughter on her smartwatch while she was at school and told her, "Your mom's been keeping a secret from you. She has a boyfriend, and because she hid it, some people think she's not being a good mom. I'm just trying to help her be honest." Chloe came home confused and frightened. She asked Kate, "Is Uncle Adam really your boyfriend? Did you do something wrong?" A 9-year-old should never be dragged into adult fears, but Derek had done it deliberately, knowing that Chloe's anxiety would be another weapon. Kate spent the night holding her daughter and trying to explain something that 12 years of silence had never prepared her to articulate. I showed up at 8 with dinner from the only place Chloe liked, and we sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, no longer pretending this was just a friendship. I answered every question a 9-year-old could ask, honestly and gently. At the end, Chloe looked at her mom and said, "I'm glad it's Adam and not some weird guy from an app." Kate laughed through tears. That moment, as small as it was, became the anchor for everything that followed. But the family didn't know about the custody petition yet. Sarah had only heard about the rumor, not the legal escalation. She was still expecting Sunday dinner to be a simple reckoning, a chance for us to come clean before the gossip did more damage. We decided not to burden her with the legal news until after the dinner. We needed her support to feel genuine, not a reaction to Derek's cruelty. That was a miscalculation. When Sarah found out later that we had walked into her home carrying a secret heavier than the one she already knew about, she would call that the second betrayal. But we made the call anyway, because we were scared and human and still learning how to stop protecting everyone from the truth. Sunday arrived gray and cold, the kind of November day that makes everything feel like a test. Sarah had invited 12 people, a casual dinner that was really a tribunal disguised as lasagna. My mother, my younger brother, 2 aunts, 3 of Sarah's closest friends who had known Kate for years, and Mike's parents, who were lovely people but would absolutely share every detail with the entire town by Monday morning. We walked in together, Kate's hand in mine, and the room went silent in waves, people noticing one by one, conversations dying mid-syllable. Sarah stood at the kitchen island, holding a wooden spoon, and watched us like she was grading a performance. I gave her a small nod and she nodded back, then said loudly, "Finally, somebody get these 2 a drink." But before the tension could settle into something manageable, the front door opened again. Derek walked in, holding Chloe's spare backpack, the one she had left at his house the previous weekend. He had not been invited. He scanned the room, found Kate, and smiled like a man who had just been handed the final piece of a long game. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I thought this was a family gathering, and since our daughter's future is being discussed, I figured I should be here." Sarah's face went white. Nobody else understood what he meant, except me and Kate, whose hand went cold in mine. Derek had just turned our private crisis into a public show, and the dinner hadn't even started yet. Sarah set down her spoon. The sound of wood on granite was louder than any of the 12 breaths held around her. She walked from the kitchen island to the hallway, not toward Derek, but between him and the rest of the family. "Derek," she said, her voice so calm it was almost unnerving, "you've brought Chloe's bag, which is the only reason I haven't asked you to leave. But if you've come to this house to turn my family's dinner into a courtroom, then I will ask you, and I won't ask nicely." Derek blinked. He had not expected Sarah to be the one to step forward. He had expected confusion, whispered questions, the awkward silence he could weaponize. Instead, he got my sister in full armor. "Kate's personal life," Sarah continued, "is not a crime, and love that took 12 years to admit is not a scandal. It's a tragedy of timing that you've decided to exploit. So you can leave the backpack and go, or you can stay and watch this family do what yours never did, show up for each other." Derek's smile faded. He glanced around the room, looking for an ally, and found none. My mother, who had gone pale when he first walked in, was now staring at him with the same expression she used on telemarketers. Mike's parents had their arms crossed. Even my brother, who usually avoided conflict like it was a subscription service, stood up from the couch and came to stand beside our mother. Derek set the backpack by the door, and for a second I thought he might leave. Then he said, "Tell her about the custody petition." And every head turned toward Kate and me. This was the moment Sarah would later call the second betrayal, but in that room it became something else. I stepped forward, keeping Kate's hand in mine, and I spoke to the whole room, not just Derek. "It's true. After the rumors started, Derek filed for a custody review. He's trying to use our relationship as evidence of an unstable home. We were going to tell you tonight after dinner." We were scared. That's not an excuse, it's the truth. My mother's face softened, not with anger but with the particular pain of a woman who knows what it feels like to be judged for loving someone. She looked at Kate and said, "Sweetheart, did you think we wouldn't fight for you?" Kate, who had been holding her composure like a cracked vase, finally broke. She didn't cry loudly, just a few tears that wouldn't stop. My mother walked over and hugged her, the kind of hug that communicates something language can't. Derek watched his entire legal strategy evaporate in the warmth of a room that had just become a fortress. He muttered something about being in touch with his lawyer and walked out, leaving the backpack in a silence that felt like peace. Dinner that night was not what anyone expected. We didn't eat lasagna in strained silence. We talked, all 12 of us, about the petition and what we could do. Mike's mother, who had once worked as a paralegal, started drafting an affidavit of support before dessert was served. My Aunt Linda offered to testify that she had seen Kate and me at family events for over a decade and that our relationship was the opposite of unstable. It was a slow-burning loyalty that should be celebrated, not weaponized. Sarah, still hurt that we hadn't told her sooner, looked at me and said, "You're an idiot, but you're my idiot brother, and I love you both." She then made a toast that I will remember until I die. To the two people who finally stopped treating my friendship as a wall and started treating it as a bridge. Took you long enough. The room raised their glasses, and Chloe, who had been quietly coloring at the end of the table, glanced up and said, "Does this mean Adam can build my new desk?" The laughter that followed felt like an exhale after years of holding breath. The custody hearing lasted exactly 1 week. Alina, our lawyer, submitted affidavits from Sarah, my mother, Mike's mom, 3 teachers who knew both Kate and me, and even the school principal who wrote that Chloe's emotional well-being had only improved in recent months. Derek's lawyer, faced with a united community that had apparently been waiting years for Kate to find happiness, advised him to withdraw the petition. He did so begrudgingly, and the final document arrived on a Tuesday, stamped with the word "dismissed." Kate framed it. Not out of triumph, but because she wanted a daily reminder that the weapon built to destroy her had turned into proof of how protected she was. 6 months later, on a warm evening in May, I proposed at the same lake overlook where it all started. Not because I had a grand plan, but because Kate suggested we drive there for old time's sake, and she smiled at me in the truck cab with that same electric quiet. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and said, "I've already spent more than a decade waiting for the right moment. I'm done waiting." She said yes before I finished the question. The surprising detail, the thing nobody saw coming, was this. Derek sent us a wedding gift, a small, carefully chosen set of barbecue tools with a note that read, "For the man who burns burgers, try not to ruin the steak." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. It was an acknowledgement that he had lost the war, and that we had won something he never possessed. A family that would stand in front of a door and refuse to let him through. Sarah was my best woman. She gave a speech that made everyone cry, and then immediately follow it with a joke about how, if she'd known playing matchmaker meant enduring 12 years of dramatic silence, she would have locked us in a car earlier. The line between friend and family, I learned, is not a boundary.